Hello guys and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I hope you're all doing good. I hope everyone's having a good week. I'm doing a bit more of a formal video again this week. So I've got actually Nathan's whiteboard behind me. So cut a long story short, we're actually moving apartments. So we've picked the apartment basically based on the fact that over here they call it like a maid's room. So obviously for anyone that doesn't know, I live in Dubai. Basically the apartment that we've gone for has like a separate maid's room, and the maid's room basically is big enough to put in like a single bed. And I said to Nathan, I was like, we need to go for this one because that can be my YouTube filming room. Because in this one, the one that we're in now, the maid's room here is just like so dark, dingy, there's no bloody window in there, so it's super, super dark. I feel like I can't breathe in there because obviously it's just like there's just confined walls. So I was like, right, I need to up my YouTube game. So I'm going to get myself a nice little sign. I'm going to get another little flip pad because this is Nathan's whiteboard. But like I said, it's good. It's just very, very big. That's the only problem. It's just very big and it takes up a lot of space. So yeah, wait, hang tight, guys. My YouTube game is going to be upped in the next few weeks. I think we should be moving into our new apartment in maybe the next week, maybe the next 10 days. We've signed everything, the Ajari sorted, like all that type of good stuff. It's just a bit annoying with Dubai, there's quite a few hidden fees. So like stuff that we didn't even realise, like when it's come round to getting it all sorted, there's a few like hidden fees that we didn't know about, but it's all sorted anyway, so it shouldn't be long now until we do move in. But let's get into today's YouTube video. So as you can probably tell from the previous videos, obviously we've gone through how to track your calories. We've gone through tracking macros, we've then gone through how to create meals based on your nutrition targets, actually creating your own meal plan. And today I wanted to, I was going to do a video today on like the actual issues with tracking MyFitnessPal, common mistakes, all that type of stuff, which I will do in a future video. Maybe I'll do that in the next video. But today I wanted to actually talk through tracking versus meal plans, because they're the two kind of main nutritional approaches that we will advise with clients at Bespoke, because ultimately clients come for us for a physique-based goal, right? So obviously we need to follow some nutrition protocol. There's other nutrition things you can do, obviously, for example, going off like portion sizes, so like a fist full of this or like a palm full of this. Now, that's fine if your goal is just general health and well-being, but obviously if you do have a physique-based goal, you do need to be a lot more accurate and a lot more specific with what you're doing, because especially if you're a small person, like obviously me, when I was in my dieting phase, I finished at 55 kilo, like there wasn't a lot of me. For me then to get lean, obviously I have to be very particular with what I'm doing. I can't just be winging it and expect to get a specific outcome. So the two main approaches that we'll typically advise is either tracking your calories or following a meal plan structure. Now, I will dig into this a little bit more at the back end of the video, so make sure you stay tuned. But I think I'll go through first of all the benefits, pros and cons of both, because typically what are the pros of one will be the cons of the other, and then I will tell you what we do with our clients and how we typically tend to hybrid both approaches together. But it's all down to specifics of when that client is ready for that approach, okay? So let's get into it first of all. So I'll run through tracking. Actually, I'll run through meal plans first of all. I'll run through meal plans because meal plans typically tend to be the kind of old-fashioned way of doing things, which isn't a bad thing, by the way. I'm actually very pro meal plans. So what's the benefit of meal plans? The biggest benefit of having a meal structure is that it's fewer decisions on the client's behalf, right? They don't have to think on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis of what they're eating, when they're eating it. It's basically laid out. So obviously the coach would go away and be like, right, you tell me as a client what you enjoy, what you don't like, any kind of dietary preferences. If you're vegan, vegetarian, you don't eat certain foods, you let me know and then I can go and create a structure based on that, right? So then the client doesn't need to think every single day, have hit my protein, have hit my macros. They can basically just crack on and follow the structure. So that's the benefit of it. There's fewer decisions, okay? The next thing is that if the client follows it, and I'll caveat this by saying if the client follows it, you could argue they're going to get quicker progress, because again there's less room to kind of make errors, which obviously is something which is a con with tracking, which I'll touch on. Basically, because we know as coaches, like based on evidence and based on experience, obviously if I get a client in who's on, I don't know, let's say they're doing 15,000 steps a day and they're 58 kilos, weight training 4 times a week, I know roughly what calories they will kind of drop on in terms of losing body fat. So it's like, right, if I write you this structure, if you follow that, I know the outcome that you're getting, so it's quite predictable and in terms of fat loss. So then you can kind of speed up the process a little bit more in terms of getting the fat loss part done and then getting into the next phase, which is the best part, right? Actually learning how to build muscle, because that's where the physique is built. So hopefully that makes sense, but it does typically tend to be a quicker rate of loss if someone's adherent to a meal plan, just because obviously there's no tracking errors. And like I said, in terms of adherence, if you're telling us that you like and dislike certain foods anyway, it shouldn't be a massive issue with your meal plan per se, I would argue. The next thing I would always say is, well, it's quite cheaper. My opinion, again, it's not necessarily, you know, evidence based, but I would always argue and say it might be evidence based actually. But if you're following, say, the same 4 to 5 meals on a day-to-day basis with a bit of variety, you know what you're going into the supermarket to buy. How many times have you gone into the supermarket, gone to like Aldi or Lidl's middle section and be like, oh, this looks good, I'll try this next week? Because I know I've been so guilty of doing this many times. So if you go in there with obviously a structure being like starter, fucking hell, meal 1, meal 2, meal 3, meal 4, you can tell I'm thinking about a meal at the weekend. You know then what you're going in for, so it's going to just reduce your food shop rather than thinking, oh, I could fancy this or I could fancy that. Like, you know what I mean? Your food shop is just a lot more convenient. And then I would always argue having a structure is very, very good for busy people. Now, a lot of my clients are, you know, they have their own businesses. A lot of them are mums, so they don't have a lot of time to think about themselves. So having someone to be like, right, this is a structure that you're going to follow, obviously it just makes things a lot easier in terms of time and limiting someone's time thinking and overthinking about food, right? So just come back to that decision fatigue again. Now I could keep going into more pros and more pros and more pros of meal plans, but again, now I'm going to go into a couple of cons. I would argue obviously a con for a meal plan is that it is very, very structured, and it doesn't really educate someone on what happens if you have a meal out. You know, that's probably the lacking side of it. But that's not to say that obviously you can't start off with that and introduce it later on down the line, which is what I'm going to touch on. I would also argue probably it does limit, you know, a bit of variety, but again, I would then flip and contra that, because I always think there's two sides to everything, right? That the problem people would argue is that obviously there's less variety. But on the flip side, I would always argue, do you really need more than 5 protein sources, 5 carbohydrate sources, and 5 dietary fat sources every single day? Most people who don't track the nutrition at all would probably skip breakfast, probably go to Tesco for a meal deal, and then probably have a different tea every single evening. So I would then argue the person that's having more of a meal plan would still get more nutrient variety. So as long as that meal plan that you're actually creating has a variety of protein sources, therefore a variety of amino acids, a variety of carbohydrates, a variety of dietary fats, you could then argue it's actually more flexibility, more variety. So there is pros and cons to everything. I don't want to get across that I have a particular bias, but I think it's really important that you can kind of understand the arguments on both sides. The negatives, again, I just think, again, it's just a structure. Like, obviously, it's just a lack of education. They would be my main kind of arguments in terms of, like, downsides of obviously having a meal plan. So the plus sides of obviously having, like, tracking your food is obviously often a lot of the cons, is often, like, contraring a lot of the meal plan stuff. So, like, having flexibility and learning how to track in something like MyFitnessPal or Nutritrek or whatever you call it, whatever these apps are, is that you've got a lot more variety. It is very, very educational, and that's the one thing I will say about tracking, which I'm a massive fan of. Tracking taught me a lot about food, right? If I had just followed a meal plan forever, I would not know the amount of calories that's in food. I would not know the amount of protein that's in food. I truly believe the more educated you are around food, the easier it is to, one, get in shape and two, stay in shape, right? Because obviously you've got to have the education. I know now when I'm eating out in a restaurant, I can look at a plate of food and roughly tell you how many calories there are thereabouts that are in it. Now, it might be a couple of hundred calories in and out, but at least I can give you a ballpark figure. If I speak to a lot of Gen Pop clients when they first start with us, they have such wildly distorted perceptions on calories and meals out. They have no idea. Like, the average main course in the UK is between 1,200 and 1,500 calories for a meal out, and that's what evidence shows us. So it's so important that we're educated on food. You know, you're going into a restaurant, everything's cooked in oils, butters, sauces, dressings. So if you do have any socials, it's very, very easy when you are tracking your food to then make these social occasions work, as opposed to sticking to a meal plan. So I do think it helps with a little bit more flexibility. Arguably, you could say you've got more variety as well, because obviously you can chop and change things a little bit more. But then on the flip side of that, I would then argue, does the variety actually serve you, or sometimes it actually cause you a problem? Because one of the downsides of tracking would then be, obviously there's a lot of decision fatigue. If you're thinking every single day, have I hit my protein, have I hit my targets, there's a lot of thinking, and there's a lot of, if you're tracking, changing things around every single day, I would then argue that potentially there's a lot more room for tracking errors. So as a byproduct, a lot of people miss bits off the tracking when they are someone that's using MyFitnessPal, and then you get to the end of the week, the progress is slow, and it's like, oh, well, did you include this? Oh, I forgot to put that in there. Because they're changing the food on a day-to-day basis. So if someone is tracking, what I would always say to them is just make sure if you are tracking your food, actually track your food like you'd be following a meal plan. So put all your food in advance for the day, because that's so important, and follow that structure. So if you want to be flexible with your nutrition, put the food in advance and then actually follow that as you would follow a structure. So you've had the flexibility of putting the foods that you want to do, nobody's done that for you, but actually put that in advance so you can then see protein, carbs, fats, calories are all matched and it's all within your targets, and then you don't need to think then during the day when you're busy, when you've got work commitments, life commitments, you can simply follow that to the letter, and it's the less decision than you need to think about during the day. So it's a lot smarter, and there's obviously a lot less risk of errors. So obviously, again, the pros of it is that you can still do that. You've got the ability to plan ahead, which is something I would always advise. But if you are someone that tracks on the go, you are going to make tracking errors. Honestly, you are. I've been doing this for a very long time. Do not track on the fly. Do not track on the go if you're going to track. Always forward log. And then the fact that obviously you've got a bit more flexibility, a bit more variety, I would always argue that then there's two main benefits of doing that. Again, like I said, the education side of things, it's teaching you a lot more about nutrition, which I believe is such a big point, because I always stand by this, my background is teaching. In schools, I do believe nutrition should be a big focus. It should be something that we learn about. We live in a world nowadays, especially in the UK, where the risk of, obesity, the risk of becoming overweight or obese, it's crazy. I think 64% of the UK population is either overweight or obese. Why are we not putting intervention in place when we're young to teach children how to eat well, how to have a balanced plate of food, what energy balance is? Because it's very important. We can kind of skirt around the edges of we don't want to go into that kind of area, because what about this and what about that might creep in. But what about if it might go the other way? What about if then that child then ends up overweight or obese? Is there not a consideration there too? So that's something I am a big advocate of. Obviously my background is in education, it's physical education, PE. And that's something I'm really passionate about. The more we can educate people, I remember myself, when I really struggled with my relationship with food, I would go into school and I thought it was healthy because I'd seen all these magazines preaching about cereal, preaching about, all the diet, fad culture stuff. I would go into school when my friends would eat a normal chicken wrap with protein sauce, a wrap for some complex carbs and veggies on the wrap, and I'd be like, I can't eat that, it's carbs. But then I would go and have some muesli or some Special K for my dinner, thinking that was better. That's not a better breakfast, but ultimately I didn't know. So you don't know what you don't know. So again, that's a different story for a different day, guys, but you need to be educated on food. And going back to what I've just said again, I truly believe the more educated that you are, the more it's going to improve your relationship with food. Because the more understanding, the more knowledge you have, and the more understanding you have of that nutritional choice downstream, to help you build muscle, to help you perform, to help you train harder, train better, feel more energized on a day-to-day basis, it's going to affect your decision making, right? It's going to affect obviously how you feel about food. So, and it's not a bad thing, you steering away from more processed food is not a bad thing, despite what the internet likes to tell you, you making smart choices around your nutrition, eating more protein into your diet, eating more fruit and veggies in your diet. We live in a culture now where it's kind of, you're demonized to be on a diet when you're eating more of those good things. It's crazy. So I feel like the more you're educated, the more you understand nutrition, the easier it is then to have a more healthy and more positive relationship with food. So hopefully that does make sense. As I've kind of alluded to, though, the downside of tracking is that obviously you're going to have to make more decisions. I do believe it will be more expensive because you're thinking about changing things around in a day-to-day. You have to think a lot more. So for busy people, do I think it's the smartest idea? No. But if I get a client that wants to track the food, again, what I said to you previously, I would make sure that client is putting the food in MyFitnessPal every single day in advance. So when they go to bed, if they've already planned the next day's food. So even though they're still tracking, they have the flexibility, it's then fewer decisions that they have to make on the day, okay? So there is pros and cons and swings and roundabouts to absolutely everything, as you can see there. But how do we like to do nutrition? What's my advice in terms of nutrition with clients? So for all clients, I prefer the first couple of weeks. Now we've got to remember, we've got as coaches like a 28-day window. When clients come in, obviously you've probably heard of like buyer's remorse and stuff like that, right? I know if I set a client's nutrition, I know what they'll progress on, period, just from experience, right? So if I get a client tracking straight away, and then you've got the consideration of making tracking errors, they forget to track on a day, they're a bit complacent with things, and they slow progress, or they don't have any progress in the first couple of weeks, they're going to think that method doesn't work. They're going to not buy into you as a coach, right? So to me, that is illogical. I would much rather get quicker buy-in, get the client seeing quick wins straight away, so they're bought into the process and they understand things straight away. Again, it depends on the clientele. Like, I have a big audience of busy people, right? A lot of my clients are not just young people. Like I said before, a lot of my clients are mums, people that are working busy jobs, are very busy people who don't have a lot of time to think, right? So to me, it makes very little sense to be like, right, you're already thinking about a lot of things in a day-to-day, go and think about more things. So initially, I will always start clients off with a structure, because the first couple of weeks as well, you've always got that buy-in of like, people don't really want to kind of steer too far away in terms of socials, this, that and the other. No, not saying that's something you should avoid. I'm not saying that by any stretch, but the first couple of weeks you'll find that people don't do that anyway, because it's a new exciting thing, it's novel, you're starting something new and they're working with you, right? So I would always capitalise on that first few weeks. So I would always start off with a structure, and then my biggest advice is always to wean in flexibility, because the structure at the start is great. It gets you buy-in, you see quick wins, you see progression from the offset, you don't have to think about as much. But what happens then when your friend says, you know, let's go out for a meal out, let's go and take the kids to a play date? What happens then when you then need to decide about food? Now, anyone could be like, oh, I'll just pull these 2 meals, you know, it says on the menu there's going to be 600 calories, well, 2 meals, my meal plan's 300 calories each, I'll take them 2 meals out. You could do that, that's an easy way to do it, but then there actually comes at a point where you actually need to learn about food, because what happens when the calories aren't on the menu? What happens when you actually need to buy into nutrition? Now, there's a lot of people who say, I don't really want to learn, I don't really want to spend too much time, I just want to be told what to do. I understand that to a certain degree, because I like being told what to do, but equally I've also got the knowledge from actually putting the groundwork in and putting the time in to learn about food, so that if I'm ever faced with a situation like I'm going out at the weekend, we're going out for a brunch, me and Nathan are going out to a brunch in Dubai. I went to this place, guys, in Vegas with my girls. We went on a hen party in Vegas and went to a place called Earth Cafe, and they've opened a place in City Walk in Dubai. So I found it, I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to relive my Vegas memories. So I'm going there on Saturday, right? I am such a person that loves stalking menus. I am such a foodie. So when I went to Earth Cafe in Vegas, I got the most unreal like breakfast burrito, like breakfast wrap. I am such a big breakfast wrap girly, right? And I've seen that obviously it's the same menu in Dubai, right? So I was like, right, that's what I'm going to have. So what I will always do is I will always look at the menu in advance. But from my knowledge of me learning about nutrition, I know roughly how many calories are going to be in that one meal. So I've already throughout the week started pre-planning ahead for that meal, so that it doesn't really affect me, because my goal right now is maintenance, right? Finish my photo shoot, my goal now is maintenance. So I want to stay where I'm at, right? And if I then go to the weekend and then I suddenly just mass over consume, I'm then going into a big surplus, then I'm at risk of obviously gaining body fat, which I don't want to do at this moment in time. So that's where spending time learning and educating yourself on nutrition is important. Like I said, meal plans are great in the short term, and my approach with a lot of clients is always follow a meal plan through the week when you're on your busiest work day. So Monday to Friday might be your working week. So that's when you're going to stick to a structure and you're going to be very, very kind of locked in, and that's what you're doing with your food. Really simple, really straightforward, right? And then at the weekend, that's where I'd have a bit more variety, a bit more flexibility at the weekend. That's what I would then typically do, okay? Or it might just be one day at a weekend, but that's how I would typically roll with it. So that's how I would advise people with nutrition, yeah? It's just having a structure through the week and then implementing flexibility, but always start a person with structure first of all, guys. If you're a coach and you're listening to my YouTube, just from experience, honestly, start a client with structure. They're not educated enough yet, yeah? It's your job to educate them. So if I've got a client who comes in, they're eating 2 meals a day, they're snacking throughout the day, they're constant grazers, picking between meals, it makes no sense for you then to be like, just keep doing what you're doing and track what you want, right? Give that person a structure, show them how we should be eating, educate them on the process and the why as to behind why you're telling them to eat certain things in which order, what things are going to be beneficial around pre and post training. Like, it's your job to educate, guys. And I always say, start out with more structure, we need more flexibility. You know, you've got 2 ends of the spectrum, structure, flexibility. My goal is to always get clients that middle ground of they choose to have structure, because it supplements the life, it's convenient for the lifestyle, but they're also educated enough to implement flexibility as and where needed around their lifestyle, for when the meals crop up, when the socials crop up, they know what to do. So that's my personal approach, guys. That's what I like to do. You know, you might have your own kind of style with clients, and that's absolutely fine. If that works for you and your business, that's absolutely cool. If you're a client listening to this, you know, and you might have just taken a few little snippets from it and be thinking, maybe that's where I'm slipping up, maybe I'm being a bit too flexible, because what clients typically do with, you know, like tracking the food and flexible dieting, you'll often, if clients are uneducated on food and you get them to track the food straight away, they'll fall into the trap of what they see on Instagram. Yeah, literally, you can eat what you want as long as it fits your calories. The amount of time I've seen clients' food diaries, and the food diary, they're tracking in like a fucking, you know, sure, Ben & Jerry's, like a Ben & Jerry's tub just because it fits in the calories. Well, that's not the most nutrient dense thing for us to be doing, right? As coaches, we have an obligation to help people learn how to eat well, yes, maybe for the fat loss goal, maybe for the hypertrophy goal, and we know that is kind of largely dictated to off energy balance. It's not just about energy balance, it's about nutrient quality, right? So we've got to consider a lot more than just calories in, calories out. What them calories are filled with is so important for health, for longevity, for success with the goal, for your adherence, to name a few. So we've got to think about nutrition on a deeper level, and that's where I truly believe having that structure to be like, right, this is what your meal should look like. Egg-based meal at breakfast, I'm just giving you an example. Egg-based meal at breakfast, tuna salad at lunch, protein oats or protein pancakes mid-afternoon. Your evening meal might be some kind of like burger bowl, beef mince, sweet potato, feta, cottage cheese, I don't know, whatever it is. And your last meal might be a Greek yogurt bowl with some fruit, dark chocolate, nut butter, seeds, whatever it is, right? Fruit in there, whatever you want to put in. But if you've got that structure off a coach and you can say, right, this is what I want to be eating. I really do want to be eating a feeding of protein, between 20 and 30 gram of protein per sitting, to maximize muscle protein synthesis so that I can then build muscle effectively. These are the things that you need to learn, guys, as opposed to just, it fits my calories, I'm tracking, it's okay. So hopefully you've taken a lot of value from the video. Like I said, that's my nutritional approach, what I tend to do. Start out with structure and then wean in flexibility. I want to get a client to the point where they don't even need to track anymore. The amount of clients that have finished coaching with me and got to a point where they're happy, they don't even track the nutrition anymore. Peak job satisfaction, okay? But you've got to move through that and you've got to earn that, okay? So you start off with the structure, you get the flexibility, and it's getting you to a point then where you don't even need, because you're that educated on stuff, you then don't need to use MyFitnessPal. You can stay in great shape year round in a shape that you're happy with without utilizing a freaking app, because what would people have done years ago? They didn't track in MyFitnessPal years ago, guys, right? So that's something I'm really passionate about as well. But hopefully you have taken a lot of value from the video. Hopefully you've taken a lot of value from this series that I'm doing at the minute in terms of nutrition. If you do have any more topics that you want me to cover, again, I'm always open to suggestions, so just pop it in the comments. But yeah, I'll catch you in the next one, guys, and I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your week and you've learned lots.